in my book right here, next to each other, and even the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats are more liberal, quote unquote, as far as not obeying the Constitution on domestic policy, but arguably the Republicans are more liberal as far as traction to the Constitution on foreign policy. It's from them that we got the Bush Doctrine, that we will talk about it eventually, which is just absolutely unconstitutional and so on.
The reason I ask is because liberals believe that conservatives are big government. Conservatives believe liberals are big government. But they're both right.
Yeah, they're both. You're right. They're both right. They seem to, when it gets down to it, it seems like both vote for the same things. Right. And so, by the way, on these question and answer periods, this isn't just for me. We've got some pretty good knowledge here among some of you, and so anybody that has answers, as well as questions.
It's time to be vigilant. I mean, the reason they're all big government is because we haven't been watching them. Right. Go to every meeting you can. Go to your commissioner's court, city council, ISDs.
I'm going to beg everyone as we go through this thing, what's the purpose of this? How are we going to solve all the problems of the world and save the world and so on? I'm going to beg everyone to do what I think is the only hope, and that is that each one of us individually figures out what's right and wrong, that we develop a set of political principles that you believe in because you're the sovereign. And even though you may be wrong or you may be right, you've got as much vote as anybody else. And so I'll say one more thing about our founding fathers. Our founding fathers did believe that God was the sovereign. They did believe that he delegated that one of the powers of God, the power to be the author of law. He delegated that to us when he gave us unalienable rights. Why would he delegate that to us? I'll tell you what some of the founding fathers said, and I believe it. They said, apparently God knows something about us that we maybe don't know ourselves, but he knows that we're the only ones who can do it. He's not going to force us to do it. We have got to learn correct political principles and learn to implement them. And their idea was, most of them were Christians, their idea was that, by the way, that Christ is the law. Isaiah was right, Messiah is the law. But they said their understanding of it is that God would delegate his sovereignty to us with the idea that we would search for these eternal correct principles. Political and legal principles is what we're talking about here, but it wouldn't hurt to find some correct principles on marital things and financial and educational and so on. But to find his correct principles and implement them voluntarily in our secular society, that we would implement the laws of God, the laws of nature and of nature's God in our society here. And the only way you and I can do is to find out what are the laws of nature and what of nature's God. I have my beliefs about what they are, and I'm going to do all I can within my sphere of influence, and we all have different spheres of influence, as you know. We may not save America. We are moving away from the U.S. Constitution. There's no question about that. We're moving away from the rule of law. If you like socialism or fascism, really is what we're moving towards. If you like kings, then you might just say, well, let's just keep doing what we're doing. We're doing just fine.
Keep on doing what we're not doing.
But if we fail and we lose it here in America, there still has to be a people prepared who understand correct principles so that there can be either a natural segue or so that we can start over again. We know, of course, once we lose our freedoms, the only way we ever get them back is by bloodshed. And we don't want it to be that way, but that's a worst case scenario. And if that's what happens, then we have to understand what are the correct principles. How do we go about getting them back? And what do we implement when we do that? Yes, sir.
You mentioned the Bill of Rights. I think it should be called the Bill of Restrictions. They're supposed to restrict the federal government. Of course, the 14th Amendment court rule that it applied to the states. States were required to be passed.
That's right. And it was restrictive. It was a restriction on them. It wasn't a grant of rights. It was just to state something that already existed that we had by natural law. You're going to hear me say that these God-given unalienable rights are not only life, liberty, and property, or the pursuit of happiness that Jefferson said, but they're all of those rights in the Bill of Rights. There's probably, the way I count, 25 of them or so, 14 or 15 of which are due process rights, speedy trial by jury, right to a jury of our peers, right to not be tortured, and all of those different kinds of rights. But they were meant to be a restriction, they were a restriction on the national government to begin with, and then through the 14th Amendment, of course, all the states had a Bill of Rights, a Declaration of Rights or a Bill of Rights, and they trusted themselves. They weren't worried. They were worried about this new national government getting out of hand, so they wanted to restrict them, so they did with the Bill of Rights. But then with the 14th Amendment, as you said, but that's getting ahead of us. But, you know, how do you not do that?
So, would you give us, is there something we should read for next week?
No, I would.
Chapters or any?
Two things. I would just start reading the 5,000-Year Leap, and I would read it at leisure, and I would skip back and forth with the things that are interesting. I'd read the first, the foreword, and so on in the first chapters or two, and then whatever you think. Secondly, if you would like, we will email to you some of these displays that we've had up here that we're just passing out hundreds and hundreds of sheets of paper. We will have a glossary every week, but we'll also email these to you if you put your email on that.
It'll get better when Texas public expenses. We don't need this other mess. We got everything we need right here.
Any other questions or comments anyone have? We hope to see you all next week. Hope that you will bring other people. You don't have to be here every single time. I promise you next week they'll get a whole new set of stuff that will add to what we had this week and lay a foundation for it.